The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, pulling James Navarro from the kind of shallow sleep that never really felt like rest. His phone buzzed against the nightstand, the screen lighting up the cramped bedroom of his rental house. He knew before answering that something was wrong. Good news didn't come in the middle of the night. "Mr. Navarro?" The voice was female, professional but tired. "This is Officer Reyes with Pittsburgh PD. We have her niece here, Mary Navarro. She was found alone at the Grant Street station downtown." James sat up, his heart already pounding. The room felt suddenly cold despite the August heat that had lingered all evening. "What do you mean alone?" She was sitting on a bench. "Been there for several hours, according to the station attendant. She's safe, but we need you to come down to Children's Hospital." She wouldn't tell us where her parents were. The drive from his house in Lawrenceville to the hospital took 18 minutes, but it felt like hours. James gripped the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup, his knuckles white under the streetlights. The city looked different at 3 in the morning, emptier, harsher. The rusted bridges over the Allegheny River cast long shadows across the water, and the occasional truck rumbled past on the highway. Mary, 6 years old, left alone in a subway station. His mind kept circling back to the same question. How long had she been there before someone finally called? How many people had walked past a little girl sitting alone, scared, and done nothing? James had always known his younger sister Amber was struggling. He'd known since they were kids that she had a reckless streak, a need to run from responsibility. But this was different. This was Mary, small, quiet Mary with her dark curls and gap-toothed smile. The hospital's emergency entrance was bright and sterile, all white walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. Officer Reyes met him in the waiting area, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a mouth set in a firm line. She'd seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "She's in room 4, Officer Reyes said, leading him down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Doctor checked her out. She's physically okay. Dehydrated, hungry, but no injuries. Emotionally, though, she paused outside the door. She's shut down. Won't talk much." James pushed open the door. Mary sat on the examination table, her legs dangling over the edge, too short to reach the floor. She wore a pink t-shirt that was too big and dirty jeans with holes in the knees. Her face was smudged with dirt, and she clutched a half-eaten chocolate bar in one small fist. When she saw James, something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or just recognition of someone familiar in a world that had suddenly become terrifying. "Hey, kiddo," James said softly, moving closer. His throat felt tight. "Uncle James." Her voice was barely a whisper. He knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see the dried tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her fingers trembled slightly around the chocolate bar. "What happened, Mary? Where are your mom and dad?" She looked down at her lap. "They said wait. They said they'd come back." "Wait where?" "At the station. The one with the stairs." Her voice got even smaller. "I waited a long time. A really long time. Then a man asked if I was lost, and then the police came." James felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been barely holding together for years anyway. He reached out slowly, carefully, and put his hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. "You're safe now," he said. "I'm here." Officer Reyes stepped forward, her notebook open. "Mr. Navarro, we'll need to contact the parents. Do you know where your sister and her husband might be?" James stood, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I know exactly where they are." The drive to Amber's apartment in Garfield took another 15 minutes. Mary sat in the passenger seat, buckled in tight, still holding that chocolate bar like it was the only solid thing in the universe. James kept glancing over at her, watching the way she stared out the window at the passing streetlights, her face blank and distant. He thought about his wife, Rachel, and their infant son, Liam. The house fire 5 years ago that had taken them both while he was working a double shift at the plant. The investigation that went nowhere. The landlord who claimed he'd fixed the faulty wiring when he clearly hadn't. The insurance company that dragged its feet until James gave up fighting. The grief that had carved him hollow and left him angry at a world where people got away with hurting others because it was easier than holding them accountable. He'd failed to protect Rachel and Liam. He wouldn't fail Mary. Amber's building was a 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and a busted front door that never locked properly. James had been here a dozen times over the past year, each visit leaving him more worried than the last. He'd offered help, money, babysitting, anything, but Amber always waved him off, insisting she had everything under control. This was control. A child abandoned in a subway station. He left Mary in the truck with the doors locked and the keys in his pocket. "I'll be right back," he told her. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." She nodded, her eyes wide. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. James took the stairs 2 at a time, his work boots heavy on the concrete steps. He could hear a TV blaring from inside the apartment before he even reached the door, some old music video show, the bass thumping through the thin walls. He knocked. Hard. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time, using the side of his fist. "Jesus, hold on." A man's voice, annoyed and slurred. The door swung open. Darren stood there in a stained undershirt and basketball shorts, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He was thin in an unhealthy way, all sharp angles and sallow skin. The apartment behind him was dim except for the glow of the television. "James!" Darren blinked at him. "What the hell, man? It's like, what time is it?" "Where's Amber?" "She's sleeping." "What's your problem?" James pushed past him into the apartment. The smell hit him immediately. Stale beer, cigarettes, and something greasy that had been left out too long. Empty bottles covered the coffee table, and dirty plates were stacked in the sink. The pantry door hung open, revealing mostly bare shelves. In a corner, a broken plastic dollhouse lay on its side, one wall cracked clean through. "Amber!" James called out. His sister emerged from the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She was 28, but looked older, her face puffy and her hair unwashed. She wore an oversized hoodie and leggings, and when she saw James, her expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "James? What are you doing here?" "The police called me. They found Mary at Grant Street Station. She'd been there for hours." Amber's eyes darted to Darren, then back to James. "Oh, yeah, we asked a friend to watch her for a bit. Must have been some kind of mix-up." "A mix-up?" James's voice was flat, controlled. "She was sitting alone on a bench in a subway station at 3 in the morning. Amber, that's not a mix-up. It was just for a few hours," Amber said, defensive now. She crossed her arms. "She's fine, isn't she?" "You're overreacting, James. You always overreact." Darren stepped up beside her, emboldened. "Yeah, man, you don't know what it's like, having a kid when you're broke. You think you're better than us? You live alone with your damn tools in that house, judging everybody. You don't have kids. You don't get it." James looked at him for a long moment. Darren was right about one thing. James didn't have kids anymore. But he remembered what it was like to be a father, even if only for 3 months before the fire. He remembered the weight of that responsibility, the fierce protective instinct that made you want to build a wall around your child and keep the whole world out. This wasn't that. This was 2 people who'd given up. "You don't get to call it parenting," James said quietly, "when the police are the ones finding her." Amber's face flushed. "Get out of my house. Look at this place." James gestured around the apartment. "Look at it, Amber. Empty pantry. Bottles everywhere. She's 6 years old. 6. And you left her in a subway station. We made a mistake, okay?" Amber's voice rose. "People make mistakes. You're not perfect either, James. You couldn't even keep your own family safe. Don't stand there and lecture me about being a parent when you failed at it too." The words landed like punches, each one calculated to hurt. James felt his hands curl in a fist at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm taking her tonight. She's staying with me." "The hell she is. Call the cops if you want. Let's see what they say when they come here and see how you're living." Darren took a step forward. "You threatening us?" James didn't move. "I'm stating a fact. Mary's not safe here. So she's coming with me tonight, and tomorrow I'm calling social services." "You always think you can fix everything," Amber said, her voice breaking now, tears starting to form. "You and your quiet judgment and your perfect little life. We're doing the best we can. Your best isn't good enough." He left before they could respond, before he could say something worse, something he couldn't take back. He walked down those 3 flights of stairs feeling like he was carrying a weight that had been building for years. Grief for his own family, anger at a system that let people like Amber and Darren keep making mistakes until it was too late, and a crushing sense of responsibility for a little girl who deserves so much better than this. Mary was still sitting in the truck, exactly where he'd left her. When James climbed in and started the engine, she looked over at him with those big, dark eyes. "Are we going home now?" she asked. James hesitated. His rental house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for a table. But it was clean. It was safe. And right now, it was the only place Mary had. "Yeah," he said. "We're going home." That night, Mary slept in James's bed while he took the couch. He lay there in the dark, listening to the old house settle, thinking about everything that needed to happen next. He'd call social services in the morning. They'd open a case, send someone to investigate. Maybe they'd remove Mary from Amber's custody. Maybe they wouldn't. The system was slow and overburdened, and unless there was obvious abuse, they tended to give parents multiple chances. But James had learned something in the 5 years since the fire. If you wanted justice, you had to build the case yourself. You had to document everything, gather evidence, make it impossible for them to ignore. He pulled out his old notebook, the same one he'd used to track the landlord's lies after Rachel and Liam died, and wrote on the first page. "They took her light. I'll take their comfort." Outside, Pittsburgh slept. The bridges stood dark against the night sky, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley. James closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. It rarely did anymore. The next morning, James called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. His supervisor at the fabrication plant sounded surprised, but didn't ask questions. James had built up enough goodwill over the years, showing up on time, taking the worst shifts, never complaining. That one sick day wasn't going to be a problem. Mary woke up around 8, disoriented at first until she remembered where she was. James made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the kind of simple food he'd learned to cook for himself after Rachel died. She ate slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure if it was okay to take more. "You can have as much as you want," James told her, sliding another piece of toast on her plate. She looked up at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "Mom says we can't waste food." "This isn't wasting. You're hungry. Eat." While she finished breakfast, James called the Allegheny County Office of Children, Youth, and Families. He was transferred 3 times before reaching a caseworker named Beverly Torres. "I need to report a neglect situation," James said, keeping his voice calm and factual. He explained everything: the subway station, the condition of the apartment, Amber's response when confronted. Beverly listened, asking occasional questions, taking notes. "We'll open an investigation," she said finally. "I'll schedule a home visit with the family within the next week." A week. James couldn't keep the frustration out of his voice. She was abandoned for hours. "I understand your concern, Mr. Navarro, but we have to follow protocol. If the child isn't in immediate physical danger." She's 6 years old. She was left alone in a public place at night. "If that's not immediate danger, what is?" Beverly's sigh was audible. "I hear you. I do. But my hands are tied by the system. I'll put a priority flag on the case. That's the best I can do right now." After hanging up, James sat at his kitchen table, staring at his notebook. A week. 7 days for Amber to clean up the apartment, to rehearse the right answers, to make it look like everything was fine. By the time Beverly showed up, there'd be food in the pantry and the bottles would be hidden away. He needed more. He needed evidence they couldn't ignore or explain away. Over the next 2 weeks, James became a ghost in his sister's life. He didn't call, didn't visit, didn't give any warning. Instead, he watched. He documented. He built a case. He drove past Amber's apartment at different times of day, taking photos on his phone. The piled up garbage bags outside the building. The broken window that never got fixed. On 3 separate occasions, he saw Darren stumbling home at 2 in the morning, clearly drunk. He talked to Mary's first-grade teacher, Ms. Keller, a woman in her 50s with warm eyes and graying hair. They met at a coffee shop near the school, and Ms. Keller's relief at being asked about Mary was obvious. "I've been worried about her for months," Ms. Keller admitted, stirring cream into her coffee. She's a sweet child. Bright, too. But she comes to school hungry more often than not. I started keeping granola bars on my desk, just for her. And she's so jumpy. If I raise my voice even a little, she flinches. Has she said anything about home? Not directly, but in her drawings. Miss Keller pulled out her phone, showing James photos she'd taken of Mary's artwork. One showed a small figure alone in a dark room. Another depicted a house with all the windows colored black. 6-year-olds draw what they feel, Mr. Navarro, and Mary feels alone. James saved the photos, added them to his growing file. Meanwhile, Mary stayed with him. They developed a routine. James would wake her up at 7, make breakfast, and drive her to school before his shift started. Some nights he worked until midnight, and on those nights, his neighbor, a retired nurse named Mrs. Chun, would watch Mary until he got home. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. It was safe. Mary started to change. Small things at first. She smiled more. She asked for seconds at dinner without that hesitant, guilty look. She drew pictures at James's kitchen table while he read the paper, and her drawings started to include color, bright yellows and blues instead of just gray and black. One evening, about 3 weeks after she'd come stay with him, Mary looked up from coloring and asked, "Uncle James, can I stay here?" James set down his newspaper. "What do you mean?" "I mean, forever. Not go back to Mom's." His chest tightened. "Do you want to stay here?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Mom gets sad a lot, and Darren yells. They forget to make dinner sometimes. But you always make dinner, and you don't yell." James knelt beside her chair. "Mary, I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're safe." "Okay, but I can't make promises I'm not sure I can keep. Do you want me here?" Her voice was so small. "Yeah, kiddo, I want you here." She hugged him then, sudden and fierce, her small arms wrapping around his neck. James held her, thinking about Rachel and Liam, about all the moments he'd lost, all the hugs that had been stolen from him. This wasn't replacing them. Nothing could. But maybe it was a chance to protect someone, to be there when it mattered. Meanwhile, Amber's social media told a different story. James checked her Facebook page regularly, watching her craft a narrative that had nothing to do with reality. She posted photos, some old, some clearly staged, showing her and Darren with Mary at the park, at a restaurant, smiling for the camera. The captions were saccharine and performative. "Family first, red heart, hashtag blessed, hashtag mama life. Pizza night with my favorite girl, hashtag family time." James screenshotted every post, dated and saved them all. The contrast between Amber's online performance and the reality he'd witnessed was stark, and he knew it would be useful eventually. Beverly Torres, the caseworker, finally made her home visit to Amber's apartment. James only found out about it afterward when Beverly called to give him an update. The home was adequate, Beverly said carefully. Clean, food in the kitchen, no obvious safety hazards. Ms. Navarro was cooperative. She admitted to making a poor judgment call the night Mary was found, but said it was an isolated incident. "And you believe that?" "Mr. Navarro, it's not about what I believe. It's about what I can prove. Right now, I don't have grounds to remove the child from the home." James closed his eyes, his hand tightening on the phone. "So what happens now?" "We'll monitor the situation. I'll schedule follow-up visits. But unless something changes, Mary will need to return to her mother's custody." After hanging up, James sat in his truck outside the fabrication plant, his shift about to start. The building loomed in front of him, all steel and concrete and harsh lights. He'd worked here for 15 years, ever since he was 23. Steady work, decent pay, but it had cost him. The night shifts meant he wasn't home when the fire started. The overtime meant he was too tired to push harder when the investigation went nowhere. He wasn't going to let this slip away the same way. That night, after putting Mary to bed, James spread out everything he'd gathered on his kitchen table. Photos, screenshots, notes from his conversations with Ms. Keller and Beverly. It was a mountain of evidence, but he wasn't sure it was enough. The system was designed to give parents second chances, third chances, infinite chances, until a child ended up seriously hurt or dead. He pulled out his notebook and added to his list. "They won't change. They'll get better at hiding. I need something undeniable." 2 days later, opportunity knocked. James stopped by Amber's apartment unannounced. using the excuse that he needed to pick up some of Mary's clothes. It was 7 in the evening, early enough that Amber couldn't claim he'd woken her up. Darren answered the door. He was drunk again. James could smell it before Darren even opened his mouth. Behind him, the apartment was a mess. Not as bad as it had been that first night, but bad enough. Dishes piled in the sink, trash overflowing, the TV blaring a football game. "What do you want?" Darren asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Mary needs some of her things." "She's not here. I know she's not here. She's with me. I'm here for her clothes." Darren's face darkened. "You got some nerve, man. Coming here, taking her." "I didn't take her. The police brought her to me." From inside the apartment, James heard shouting. Amber's voice, high and angry. Then a crash, something breaking. Darren glanced over his shoulder, then back at James. Not a good time. James pushed past him. He didn't care about politeness anymore, didn't care about family diplomacy. In the living room, Amber stood near the TV, her face red, a broken plate at her feet. She was yelling at someone on her phone, her voice shrill. "Don't tell me I'm being unreasonable. You're the one who—" She noticed James and stopped mid-sentence. "I have to go." She hung up, turning to face him. "Get out of my house. I need some of Mary's things. You don't get to just walk in here. Then hand me her stuff, and I'll leave." "She's my daughter." Amber's voice cracked. "Mine, not yours. You don't have any right. I have every right when she was abandoned in a subway station. That was one time, one mistake. You're acting like I'm some kind of monster." James looked around the apartment, at the mess, the bottles, the broken plate on the floor. "You're acting like one." Amber's eyes filled with tears, but there was anger behind them, not regret. "You think you're so perfect. You with your quiet little life and your judgment. You couldn't even keep your own family alive, but somehow you're qualified to take mine." The words hung in the air, ugly and designed to wound. James felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the grief that never really went away, just learned to hide. But he'd heard worse. He'd said worse to himself in the dark hours after the fire. "Mary's staying with me until you can prove you're capable of taking care of her," he said quietly. "And right now you can't." Darren moved toward him then, hands balled into fists. "You need to leave. Now." James didn't back down. He was 3 inches taller than Darren, and had spent years hauling steel at the plant. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't afraid of one either. "Touch me and I call the cops," James said evenly. "They'll love to see this place again." Darren stopped, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. For a moment, it looked like he might do it anyway, might throw the punch that would give James all the justification he needed. But Amber grabbed Darren's arm, pulling him back. "Just give him the damn clothes," she said, her voice breaking. "Let him go." 5 minutes later, James left with a garbage bag full of Mary's things, clothes that were too small, worn-out sneakers, a stuffed rabbit with one eye missing. As he walked down the stairs, he heard them arguing again, their voices echoing through the building. He sat in his truck for a moment before starting the engine, his hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from anger. Anger at Amber for throwing Rachel and Liam in his face. Anger at Darren for being useless. Anger at himself for not doing this sooner, for not seeing how bad things had gotten until Mary ended up alone and scared in a subway station. He pulled out his phone and called Beverly Torres again, leaving a detailed voicemail about what he'd just witnessed. He didn't know if it would matter. He didn't know if anything he was doing would matter. But he had to try. The call came 6 weeks after Mary had started living with James. It was Beverly Torres, her voice careful and professional. "Mr. Navarro, we need to discuss Mary's living situation." James's stomach dropped. He was at the plant, taking his lunch break in the parking lot. The October air had turned cold, and dead leaves scraped across the pavement in the wind. "What about it?" "Ms. Navarro has completed several requirements we set for her. She's attended 3 parenting classes, maintained steady employment, and her home visits have shown improvement. We're recommending that Mary be returned to her mother's custody." "You're recommending." James heard the flatness in his own voice. "Based on what? 3 classes and a clean apartment when you show up?" "Mr. Navarro, I understand your frustration." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you're about to send a kid back into a bad situation because her mother learned how to perform for social workers. Beverly's pause was heavy. I don't make these decisions lightly, but the goal is always reunification when possible. Ms. Navarro has shown commitment to change. Has she? James pulled out his phone, scrolling through his recent screenshots. Because 2 days ago, she posted on Facebook about going out to a club. Last week she was complaining online about not having enough money for bills, but somehow she's buying new clothes. That sounds like someone who's changed. Social media isn't evidence of unfitness. Then what is? What does it take? Does Mary have to get hurt first? I know you care about your niece. I don't just care about her. I'm the only one who does. James took a breath, trying to calm down. Give me more time. Let me build a better case. A case for what? Legal custody, if that's what it takes. Another pause. Mr. Navarro, are you planning to file for custody? I'm planning to keep Mary safe, whatever that requires. Beverly's voice softened slightly. I respect what you're trying to do, but custody battles are expensive, complicated, and often traumatic for the child, unless you have concrete evidence of abuse or severe neglect. I'm working on it. After hanging up, James sat in his truck, staring at the gray sky. He'd known this was coming. Of course Amber would jump through just enough hoops to look like she was trying. Of course the system would want to give her another chance. That's how it worked. Benefit of the doubt, second chances, waiting for proof that usually came too late. He thought about Mary, how she'd blossomed over the past 6 weeks. How she didn't flinch anymore when he raised his voice even slightly. How she'd gained weight, her face filling out, color returning to her cheeks. How she'd started bringing home drawings from school that showed happy families and bright suns. He couldn't let her go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That evening, James sat Mary down at the kitchen table. She'd been doing homework, simple math problems, and a worksheet about animal habitats. She looked up at him with those dark eyes, sensing something serious in his demeanor. Mary, we need to talk about your mom. Her expression shifted, closing off slightly. Okay, the social worker thinks you might need to go back to living with her soon. Mary's face fell. I don't want to. I know. I don't want that either. But, please, Uncle James. Her voice broke, tears starting to form. Please don't make me go back. I like it here. I'm safe here. Mom and Darren, they don't want me there anyway. They never did. James felt something crack in his chest. He reached across the table, taking her small hand in his. Listen to me, kiddo. I'm going to fight for you. I promise. But I need you to help me, okay? If Ms. Torres talks to you, you need to tell her the truth about what it was like living with your mom. Can you do that? Mary nodded, wiping her eyes with her free hand. And Mary, if you ever feel scared or unsafe, if anything bad happens, you tell me immediately. Understand? Okay. That night, after Mary had gone to bed, James added to his notebook. System is designed to favor biological parents. Need something that forces their hand. Need them to show who they really are. He spent the next few days digging deeper. He contacted Amber's landlord, who confirmed that rent had been paid late 4 times in the past year, and that he'd received noise complaints from neighbors about shouting and fighting. He talked to Darren's previous employer, a warehouse where Darren had been fired for showing up drunk. He printed bank statements that Amber had carelessly left visible on her Facebook page in the background of a photo, showing regular expenditures at liquor stores and bars. And he waited, because if there was one thing James had learned from the fire investigation, it was that patience often revealed what confrontation couldn't. His patience paid off 2 weeks later. It was a Wednesday evening, and James had just picked Mary up from Mrs. Chen's apartment after his shift. They were walking up to his front door when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Uncle James? The voice was young, scared. Not Mary, someone else. Who is this? It's Maya, Amber's neighbor, the girl upstairs. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Something's happening. There's a lot of screaming. And I think I heard something break. Like glass. And Mary. James's blood went cold. Mary's there. Yeah, she came over this afternoon. Amber said Beverly wanted them to do some family time or something. But it's bad, Uncle James. It sounds really bad. James was already moving, ushering Mary into the house and grabbing his truck keys. Call the police. Right now. Tell them there's a domestic disturbance and a child is present. Okay. James made the drive to Amber's apartment in 12 minutes, breaking every speed limit. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. Beverly had arranged a visit without telling him. How long had Mary been there? What had happened? By the time he arrived, there were already 2 police cars outside the building, their lights flashing red and blue in the gathering dusk. James took the stairs at a run, his work boots pounding on concrete. Amber's door was open. Inside, 2 officers were talking to Darren, who was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. Amber stood near the kitchen, her arms crossed, her face blotchy from crying. Broken glass littered the floor near the TV. A beer bottle shattered on impact. And in the corner, pressed against the wall with her hands over her ears, was Mary. James pushed past the officers and went straight to her. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, and when she saw him, she threw herself into his arms, sobbing. "It's okay," he murmured, holding her tight. "I've got you. You're okay now." One of the officers, a young man with a crew cut and careful eyes, approached them. "Sir, are you family? I'm her uncle. She's been staying with me." James stood, keeping Mary close. "What happened here?" The officer glanced back at Amber and Darren, then at James. "Neighbor called in a disturbance. When we arrived, there was evidence of an altercation. Broken glass, raised voices. The child was alone in the corner. They were fighting? That's what we're trying to determine." Amber's voice cut through the apartment. "It wasn't about her. Darren and I were just arguing. It had nothing to do with Mary." James looked at his sister. Her eyes were wild, defensive. Darren hadn't looked up from the couch. "You brought her here," James said quietly, "into this, while you were fighting, and you left her scared and alone in the corner. It was one argument." Amber's voice rose. "God, James, you act like we're the worst parents in the world. We made one mistake. One." James's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it. "One mistake was the subway station. This is a pattern." The officer with the crew cut cleared his throat. "Mr. Navarro, why don't you take Mary outside? We'll finish taking statements here." James nodded, guiding Mary toward the door. As they passed Amber, she reached out, trying to touch Mary's shoulder. "Baby, it's okay. Mommy and Daddy were just having a disagreement." Mary flinched away, pressing closer to James. Amber's hand dropped, her face crumpling. Outside, James sat with Mary on the curb, the police lights painting everything in alternating colors. She'd stopped crying but still trembled slightly. He kept his arm around her shoulders, solid and steady. "Did they hurt you?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "They were just yelling, really loud." And Darren threw the bottle. "It didn't hit me, but it was close." And then Mom started crying and Darren left, and she kept saying it was all her fault. She'd ruined everything. "I didn't know what to do." "You didn't do anything wrong, Mary. None of this is your fault. Are they going to make me stay with her?" James looked up at the building, at the lights of the apartment where his sister was probably still making excuses, still insisting this was all some kind of misunderstanding. He thought about the system, about Beverly Torres and her talk of second chances and reunification. He thought about the evidence he'd been gathering, the case he'd been building. And he thought about the fact that sometimes you couldn't wait for the system to catch up. Sometimes you had to force its hand. "No," he said firmly, "you're coming home with me." 20 minutes later, after giving his statement to the officers and watching them cite both Amber and Darren for the disturbance, James drove Mary back to his house. She fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted from fear and tears. When they got home, he carried her inside and put her to bed without waking her. Then he sat at his kitchen table with his notebook and his phone and made a decision. He called Beverly Torres and left a detailed voicemail about everything that had happened. He sent her photos of the broken glass, the police report number, contact information for Maya, the neighbor who'd called. He didn't ask politely. He didn't suggest. He stated clearly, Mary would not be returned to Amber's custody. If Beverly wanted to fight him on that, he'd get a lawyer. He'd take it to court. He'd do whatever it took. Then he opened his laptop and started researching custody law in Pennsylvania. It was past midnight when he finally stopped reading, his eyes burning and his head full of legal terms he'd never needed to know before. The next morning, Beverly Torres called him back. "I received your voicemail," she said. Her voice was different, less diplomatic, more direct. I also spoke with the responding officers and confirmed the details. Given this incident, combined with the previous concerns, I'm recommending that Mary remain in your care, pending a formal custody evaluation. James exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Thank you. Mr. Navarro, I want you to understand something. If you pursue legal custody, this will become a court matter. Your sister will have the right to contest it. It could take months. It could get ugly. It's already ugly. Yes, Beverly said quietly. It is. I'll forward you information about family court procedures and recommend a few attorneys who specialize in kinship custody cases. In the meantime, Mary can stay with you. After hanging up, James sat in his kitchen, watching the morning light come through the window. Mary was still sleeping. The house was quiet except for the old radiator clanking as it heated up. He'd crossed a line the night before, from concerned uncle to active opponent. Amber would see it as betrayal. Darren would call him controlling. Their family would take sides, and James would probably lose most of them. But he'd made his choice. Some things mattered more than family peace. Some things were worth fighting for even when you knew the fight would cost you. That afternoon, James called the attorney Beverly had recommended, a woman named Rita Delgado who specialized in custody cases. Her office was in a converted townhouse in Shadyside, and when James sat across from her desk 2 days later, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. Tell me everything, Rita said, pulling out a legal pad. Start from a night she was found at the station. James talked for 40 minutes straight, walking her through every detail. The subway station, the conditions at Amber's apartment, the documentation he'd gathered, the police incident. Rita took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When he finished, she sat back in her chair, tapping her pen against the legal pad. Mr. Navarro, I'm going to be blunt with you. You have a case, but it's not as strong as you think it is. James's stomach tightened. What do you mean? You have evidence of neglect, yes. The subway incident is damning. The police report helps, but the system gives enormous weight to biological parents, especially mothers. Amber has been attending classes. She's employed. The social worker's visits showed improvement. A judge could easily see this as a mother who made mistakes but is trying to do better. She's performing. It's an act. Maybe. Probably. But proving that in court is harder than you think. Rita leaned forward. Here's what you need to understand. Custody cases aren't about who loves the child more or who has better intentions. They're about stability, safety, and the child's best interests as defined by very specific legal standards. You're a single man who works night shifts. Your sister is the biological mother who has completed court-recommended programs. On paper, it's not as clear-cut as you want it to be. James felt frustration rising. So what do I need? Time, documentation, and ideally, your sister making another serious mistake that demonstrates a pattern of behavior the court can't ignore. Rita's expression softened. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I'm not going to lie to you or take your money under false pretenses. This could go either way. If I don't fight, she goes back to Amber's. Yes, then I fight. Rita nodded slowly. Okay, we'll file for emergency custody based on the recent incident and request a full evaluation. It'll take time, probably several months. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Keep Mary stable. And pray your sister shows the court who she really is. The custody filing went through in early November. James had to take a day off work to sign papers and provide statements. The court date was set for January, 9 weeks away. In the meantime, Mary would remain with James under a temporary custody order. Amber's response came via Facebook, of course. She didn't call James directly. Instead, she posted a long, rambling status about family betrayal and false accusations. She painted herself as a struggling mother being persecuted by a controlling brother who couldn't move on from his own losses. Some people can't stand to see others happy. They have to tear down everything because they're miserable. I made one mistake, and now my brother is trying to steal my daughter. Blood doesn't mean anything to some people. Hashtag stay strong, hashtag God knows. The post got 37 likes and dozens of sympathetic comments. James read it once, screenshotted it, and added it to his file. The extended family took sides. James's mother, who lived in Florida and hadn't been involved in any of their lives for years, called Amber to offer support. An uncle James hadn't spoken to in a decade reached out to tell him he was destroying the family. A few cousins sent messages defending Amber, calling James heartless. He ignored all of it, let them think what they wanted. He wasn't doing this for them. Mary thrived through the fall. She made friends at school, brought home good grades, started asking questions about things she'd never felt safe asking before. One night at dinner, she asked James why he didn't have any pictures of his wife and son. "I used to," he said carefully. "After they died, it hurt too much to look at them, so I put them away." "Does it still hurt?" "Yeah, but differently now. Less like an open wound, more like an old scar." Mary thought about that, pushing her peas around her plate. "Do you think they'd be happy that I'm here?" James's throat tightened. "Yeah, kiddo. I think they'd be really happy." December came cold and sharp. The custody evaluation began. Interviews with James, with Mary, with Amber and Darren. A court-appointed psychologist named Dr. Reeves visited James's home twice, observing how he and Mary interacted. She asked Mary questions about where she felt safest, what a normal day was like at each house, whether anyone had ever hurt her. James didn't know what Mary said. He wasn't allowed in the room during her interviews. Meanwhile, Amber escalated. She started showing up at Mary's school, trying to pick her up, claiming she had every right to see her daughter. The school had been given notice of the custody arrangement and refused to release Mary to anyone but James, which led to 2 separate incidents of Amber causing a scene in the office. Then came the phone calls. Amber would call James's cell at odd hours, sometimes crying, sometimes angry. She'd accuse him of poisoning Mary against her. She'd threaten to file charges against him for kidnapping. She'd plead for him to drop the case, promising she'd changed, promising everything would be different. James stopped answering. He saved every voicemail. Rita Delgado advised him to get a restraining order if the harassment continued. "It establishes a pattern of unstable behavior," she explained. "The court will take it into account." But James hesitated. Part of him, the part that remembered Amber as his little sister, the girl who used to follow him around when they were kids, didn't want to push her that far. He told himself he'd wait, see if she calmed down. She didn't. 3 weeks before the court date, Amber and Darren showed up at James's house at 10 at night. He heard the pounding on his door, looked through the peephole, and saw them both standing there. Amber was crying. Darren looked like he'd been drinking. James opened the door just enough to talk through the gap. His foot braced against the frame. "What do you want?" "I want to see my daughter," Amber said, her voice high and desperate. "Please, James, just let me see her. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. It's 10 at night. She's asleep. I don't care. I'm her mother. You can't keep her from me." "The court order says." "Fuck the court order." Amber pushed against the door, but James held it firm. "She's mine. You have no right." Darren stepped forward, putting his hand on Amber's shoulder. "Come on, babe. This isn't working. Let's just go." "No, I'm not leaving without seeing her." Mary's voice came from behind James, small and scared. "Uncle James." He glanced back. She stood at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Go back to bed, kiddo," James said gently. "Everything's fine." But Amber had heard her voice. "Mary, baby, come here. Mommy wants to see you." Mary shrank back, disappearing from view. James looked at his sister through the gap in the door. Her face was red, mascara running, her hair wild. She looked nothing like the composed mother she'd been trying to perform in front of social workers. "You need to leave," James said quietly. "Or what? You'll call the cops on me again? Add it to your little file?" "If that's what it takes, yeah." Amber's face twisted. "You're destroying her life. You're taking her away from her family. I'm giving her a chance at a life. That's more than you ever did." The slap came out of nowhere. Amber's hand shot through the gap, catching James across the cheek. It wasn't hard. She didn't have much room to swing, but the shock of it made him step back. That's when Darren grabbed the door and tried to push it open. James threw his weight against it, shoving back. There was a brief struggle, both of them grunting with effort, and then James heard the sound he'd been waiting for, sirens in the distance, getting closer. Mrs. Chun had called the police. James stepped back, letting them push their way into his small entry hall. "You want to do this? Fine, but you're doing it in front of the cops." By the time the police arrived 3 minutes later, Amber was sitting on James's couch sobbing while Darren paced the living room. Mary had come back downstairs and was watching from the staircase, her eyes wide. The officers took statements. They documented the mark on James's cheek from where Amber had hit him. They noted that Amber and Darren had entered the home without permission after being asked to leave. They saw Mary's reaction, the way she stayed close to James, the way she flinched when Amber tried to approach her. Amber and Darren weren't arrested, but they were escorted from the property with a warning. As they left, Amber turned back to look at James, and the hatred in her eyes was clear and cold. "This isn't over," she said. "No," James agreed. "It's not." That night, after the police left and Mary was finally settled back in bed, James sat at his kitchen table and stared at his notebook. He was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with his shift at the plant. Rita had been right. Amber was showing the court exactly who she was. Every outburst, every scene at the school, every late-night visit, it all built the case James needed. But watching his sister unravel, seeing the person she'd become, didn't feel like a victory. It just felt sad. He added a final note to his file. She could have chosen different. At any point, she could have chosen to be better. But some people only know how to be the victim of their own choices. The Allegheny County Family Court building looked like every other government structure James had ever been in, all concrete and glass and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. It was January 15th, and outside the windows, Pittsburgh was gray with winter. Snow had fallen overnight, leaving a thin crust on the parked cars and dead grass. James arrived 40 minutes early, wearing the only suit he owned, a dark blue one he'd bought for Rachel's funeral and hadn't worn since. Rita Delgado met him in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, her briefcase in one hand and a coffee in the other. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I've been better. That's honest." Rita gestured toward a bench near the courtroom doors. "Let's sit. We have time before we go in." They sat, and Rita walked him through what to expect. The hearing would last most of the day. Both sides would present evidence and call witnesses. The judge, a woman named Judge Patricia Hammond, would ask questions. Mary would likely be interviewed privately in chambers. "The most important thing," Rita said, "is to stay calm. No matter what Amber or her lawyer says, no matter how they try to paint you, keep your composure. Let the evidence speak. What if it's not enough?" Rita was quiet for a moment. "Then we appeal." "But James, I'm more confident now than I was 2 months ago. The documentation you've provided, the police reports, the school records, it all paints a clear picture. And Amber's behavior has been, let's say, not helpful to her case." Amber arrived 20 minutes later with Darren and her attorney, a man in his 50s named Theodore Polk who wore an expensive suit and had the kind of practice smile that put James's teeth on edge. Amber had clearly tried to dress for court. A conservative black dress, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked nothing like the wild, desperate woman who'd shown up at James's door a few weeks ago. She didn't look at James. Neither did Darren. At 9:30, the bailiff called them into the courtroom. Judge Hammond was a black woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had a reputation, Rita had told James, for being thorough and fair, but also for having no patience for people who wasted her time. The courtroom itself was smaller than James expected. Wood paneling, a handful of bench seats, the judge's platform elevated above everything else. It felt formal and cold, and as James sat at the plaintiff's table next to Rita, he couldn't help thinking about how Mary's whole future would be decided in this room over the next few hours. Judge Hammond looked over her reading glasses at both tables. "This is a custody hearing in the matter of Mary Navarro, age 6. Mr. James Navarro is petitioning for full legal and physical custody, with Ms. Amber Navarro, the biological mother, contesting. I've reviewed the case file and the evaluation report from Dr. Reeves. We'll begin with opening statements." Rita stood, her voice clear and professional. She laid out James's case methodically. The subway station incident, the documented neglect, the police reports, the testimony from teachers and social workers. She painted a picture of a mother who'd consistently failed to provide a safe, stable environment and an uncle who'd stepped in when no one else would. Theodore Polk's opening was different. He focused on Amber's rights as a biological parent, her efforts to improve, her completion of parenting classes. He portrayed James as a well-meaning but overreaching uncle who couldn't separate his own grief from Mary's needs, who saw threats where there were only normal family struggles. Ms. Navarro made mistakes, Polk said smoothly. What parent hasn't? But she's taken responsibility. She's grown. And now she's being punished for daring to stumble while learning how to be a better mother. That's not justice. That's tragedy. James kept his face neutral, but inside he was seething. Normal family struggles. As if leaving a 6-year-old alone in a subway station was just a stumble. The testimony began. Rita called Beverly Torres first. The caseworker walked through her involvement in the case, confirming the initial report, the home visits, the concerns that had accumulated over time. In your professional opinion, Rita asked, did Ms. Navarro's living situation provide a safe and stable environment for Mary? Beverly hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There were ongoing concerns. While Ms. Navarro made efforts to improve, there were also recurring incidents that suggested deeper issues with stability and judgment. Polk cross-examined her, trying to get Beverly to admit that Amber had met all required benchmarks, that there was no evidence of physical abuse, that family reunification was always the preferred goal. Beverly held her ground, but James could see the cracks Polk was trying to create in the case. Next came Ms. Keller, Mary's teacher. She testified about Mary's behavior at school, the hunger, the fearfulness, the change she'd seen in Mary since she'd been living with James. She's a different child, Ms. Keller said, her voice warm. More confident, happier. She's excelling academically now, and she started making friends. Before, she was withdrawn and anxious. Polk tried to suggest that this change could be attributed to normal development, to Mary simply growing older. Ms. Keller wasn't having it. I've been teaching first grade for 23 years, she said firmly. I know the difference between a child who's naturally shy and a child who's scared. Mary was scared. Then came the police officers who'd responded to the domestic disturbance call. They testified about what they'd found. The broken glass, Mary cowering in the corner, Amber and Darren's argument. Their reports were clinical and factual, which made them all the more damning. Dr. Reeves, the court psychologist, was called next. She'd conducted extensive interviews with everyone involved, and her evaluation report was 47 pages long. James had read it 3 times. Based on my evaluation, Dr. Reeves testified, it's my professional opinion that Mary has formed a secure attachment with her uncle and experiences significant anxiety about returning to her mother's care. She expressed feeling safer with Mr. Navarro and demonstrated clear distress when discussing the incidents that occurred while in her mother's custody. Did you find any evidence that Mr. Navarro had coached Mary or influenced her testimony? Rita asked. No. Mary's responses were consistent, age-appropriate, and spontaneous. Children don't fabricate fear that visceral. Polk's cross-examination tried to poke holes, suggesting that children could be manipulated even by well-meaning adults, that Mary might be simply echoing what she'd heard James say. Dr. Reeves held firm. Mr. Polk, I've been doing this work for 19 years. I can tell when a child is repeating someone else's narrative. This wasn't that. This was a child speaking her truth. When it was time for Amber's side to present their case, Polk called her to the stand first. She looked small sitting there, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed. Polk walked her through a carefully constructed narrative. Yes, she'd made mistakes. The subway incident was a terrible lapse in judgment. She'd trusted someone she shouldn't have to watch Mary, and it had gone horribly wrong. But she learned from it. She'd attended every class, completed every requirement, worked hard to improve her life. Ms. Navarro, do you love your daughter? Polk asked. More than anything. Amber's voice broke. She's my whole world. I know I messed up. I know I wasn't the mother she deserved. But I'm trying. I'm really trying. It was a good performance. James had to give her that. If he hadn't seen the reality, the dirty apartment, the empty pantry, the way Mary flinched, he might have been moved by it. Then Rita stood for cross-examination, and everything changed. Ms. Navarro, you testified that the subway incident was a one-time lapse in judgment. Is that correct? Yes. And yet, according to school records, Mary arrived at school without lunch or lunch money on at least 15 separate occasions during the fall semester before she came to live with Mr. Navarro. Is that also a lapse in judgment? Amber shifted in her seat. We were having financial difficulties. Were you? Rita pulled out a document. Because according to your own Facebook posts, you went to a casino in November. You bought concert tickets in October. You posted photos of new clothes in September. But you couldn't afford to feed your daughter lunch. That's taking things out of context. Let's talk about the domestic disturbance that led to the police being called. You and Mr. Larson were arguing, correct? It was just a disagreement. A disagreement during which a beer bottle was thrown and shattered 3 feet from where your daughter was sitting. It wasn't thrown at her, but it was thrown in her presence, while she was supposed to be having court-ordered supervised family time. Rita's voice was calm but relentless. Ms. Navarro, how many parenting classes did the court require you to complete? 6. And how many did you actually complete? Amber's face went pale. 6. Are you sure? Rita pulled out another document. Because according to records from the parenting program, you completed 5 classes. The 6th class, you signed in but left after 20 minutes. However, you submitted a certificate claiming you'd completed all 6 sessions. The courtroom went very quiet. I don't remember that. You don't remember? Rita's eyebrows rose. Ms. Navarro, did you or did you not forge a completion certificate for the 6th parenting class? Amber looked at her lawyer. Polk stood, objecting, trying to claim the question was leading. Judge Hammond overruled him. Answer the question, Ms. Navarro, the judge said. Amber's hands twisted in her lap. I was having a hard day. I left early, but I'd done all the other classes, and I thought it wouldn't matter. It was just one class. So you forged the certificate. I didn't think of it as forging. You falsified a court-required document. Yes or no? Yes. Amber's voice was barely a whisper. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs. James watched his sister sit there, tears streaming down her face, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger. Just a hollow kind of acknowledgement that this was always how it would end. Rita wasn't done. She pulled out the social media posts, the police reports from the night Amber had shown up at James's house, the testimonies from neighbors about noise and neglect. She built a wall of evidence so high and so solid that no amount of tears or apologies could climb over it. By the time Rita sat back down, Amber looked destroyed. Mr. Polk, do you have any redirect? Judge Hammond asked. Polk stood, but James could see he'd lost. He asked a few weak questions trying to salvage something, but it was over. Everyone in the courtroom knew it. Then it was James's turn to testify. He walked through everything, finding Mary at the hospital, the condition of Amber's apartment, the decision to document everything. He talked about building Mary a bed, about the dinners they shared, about watching her slowly come back to life. Polk tried to paint him as obsessive, as unable to let go of his own grief. Isn't it true, Mr. Navarro, that you lost your wife and son 5 years ago? Yes. And isn't it possible that you're projecting your need to protect onto your niece? That you're trying to fill a void in your own life? James looked at the lawyer for a long moment. I'm protecting her because no one else would. That's not projection. That's responsibility. But you can't replace your own child with. I'm not trying to replace anyone. James's voice was steady, firm. My son is gone. Nothing changes that. But Mary is here, and she's alive, and she deserves someone who puts her first. That's all I'm doing. The hearing broke for lunch. James sat outside the courthouse, not hungry, just needing air. Rita found him on a bench near the entrance. That went well, she said. Did it? Better than well. The forged certificate was the nail we needed. Hammond's not going to ignore that. James rubbed his face. How long until she decides? Could be today. Could be next week. But James, Rita sat beside him. Start preparing yourself for the reality that you might actually win this. And if I do, what happens to Amber? That's not your responsibility to carry. She's still my sister. She's an adult who made choices. You didn't force her hand. You just made sure someone was paying attention. Rita stood. Come on, let's go back in. We're almost done. The afternoon session was shorter. Judge Hammond interviewed Mary privately in her chambers. James wasn't allowed to be present, which made every minute feel like an hour. When Mary came out 30 minutes later, she looked tired, but okay. James wanted to ask her what she'd said, what the judge had asked, but he knew better. Finally, after all the testimony was done, Judge Hammond called for a brief recess to review everything. 15 minutes later, she returned to the bench. I've considered all the evidence presented today, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. This is never an easy decision. Parental rights are fundamental, and the bond between mother and child is not something this court takes lightly. However, my primary obligation is to the best interests of the child. James felt his heart hammering. Ms. Navarro, you love your daughter. I don't doubt that. But love alone does not create a safe environment. The evidence shows a pattern of neglect, poor judgment, and, most critically, dishonesty in your dealings with the court. The forged certificate alone demonstrates a fundamental lack of respect for the process designed to help you become a better parent. Amber was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. Mr. Navarro has provided a stable, safe home for Mary. Dr. Reeves's evaluation makes clear that the child thrives in his care and experiences anxiety about returning to her mother. Given all of this, I'm granting Mr. Navarro full legal and physical custody of Mary Navarro, effective immediately. The gavel came down. For a moment, James couldn't move. The words echoed in his head, full custody, effective immediately, but they didn't feel real yet. Mr. Navarro, Judge Hammond looked at him directly. This is a significant responsibility. I trust you understand that. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Navarro will be granted supervised visitation rights, pending completion of additional counseling and parenting programs. But Mary's primary residence will remain with you. Beside him, Rita was gathering papers, professional and calm, but James could see the small smile on her face. Across the courtroom, Amber had collapsed against the table, Darren's arm around her shoulders. Polk was talking to them in low tones, probably discussing appeal options. But it was over. James knew it was over. Outside the courthouse, the January wind cut sharp and cold. Mary was waiting in Mrs. Chen's car in the parking lot. They decided it would be better if she didn't sit through the hearing. James walked over, opened the passenger door, and knelt down to her level. How'd it go? Mary asked, her voice small and hopeful. You're staying with me. For good. Her face lit up in a way that made James's chest ache. She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tight, and he held her while Mrs. Chun smiled through the window. Forever, Mary whispered. Yeah, kiddo. Forever. That night, after Mary had gone to bed, James sat at his kitchen table one last time with his notebook. He looked at all the notes he'd made, all the evidence he'd gathered, all the late nights and careful documentation. Then he wrote one final line. Justice isn't always clean. Sometimes it's just being there when no one else will. He closed the notebook and put it away in a drawer. 1 year later, James and Mary stood in the small backyard of his rental house, planting flowers in the section of earth they'd cleared the week before. It was May, and the air smelled like fresh dirt and new growth. Mary had picked out marigolds and petunias, bright oranges and purples that would bloom all summer. This one goes here, Mary asked, holding up a marigold. Perfect spot. She planted it carefully, patting the soil around the base the way James had shown her. At 7 years old, she'd shot up another few inches, and her face had filled out. She laughed more now, real laughter, the kind that came from the belly. She did well in school, had friends, talked about wanting to join the soccer team in the fall. Sometimes she still asked about Amber. Do you think Mom's still mad at me? James always answered honestly. She might be mad at me, but you didn't do anything wrong. Remember that. Do you think she'll ever get better? I don't know, kiddo. Some people change. Some people don't. Amber had attended exactly 2 supervised visits before stopping. Beverly Torres had told James that Amber claimed the visits were too painful, that seeing Mary was a reminder of everything she'd lost. James suspected it was more that Amber couldn't perform for an audience anymore, couldn't play the role of devoted mother when there was a social worker in the room taking notes. He'd heard through family members that Amber and Darren had split up. That Amber was living with a new boyfriend. That she'd posted something on Facebook about new beginnings and letting go of toxic people. James didn't check. He didn't need to. That chapter was closed. Mary finished planting her flower and sat back on her heels, admiring her work. It looks good. It does. Uncle James. Yeah. Thank you. For wanting me. James looked at her. This small person who'd been abandoned and scared and alone, who'd somehow landed in his life at a time when he thought he'd never have family again. He thought about Rachel and Liam, about the fire and the grief that had carved him hollow. He thought about all the nights he'd spent angry at a world that took and never gave back. But here was Mary, alive and smiling, planting flowers in his backyard. Thank you for letting me, he said quietly. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun warm on their backs. Above them, the sky was clear and bright. No clouds, no gray, just endless blue. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, and birds called to each other in the trees. James looked up at that sky and exhaled. For the first time in 5 years, it felt like he could breathe all the way down to the bottom of his lungs. He hadn't forgiven the world for what it had taken. He probably never would. But he'd found something anyway. Not redemption, not closure, just this, a chance to protect someone who needed it to be there when it mattered. Sometimes that was enough. Mary stood, brushing dirt off her knees. Can we get ice cream later? Yeah, we could get ice cream. Chocolate chip. Whatever you want, kiddo. She grinned and went back to planting, humming some songs she'd learned at school. James watched her for a moment, then picked up his own flowers and joined her. They worked side by side until the sun started to set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, and the small backyard was full of color that would last through the summer and into fall. Inside the house, dinner would need to be made. Tomorrow, James would work the night shift again, and Mary would stay with Mrs. Chun until he got home. They'd fall back into their routine, school and homework, and simple meals around a small table. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what either of them had planned for their lives. But it was theirs, and that was worth everything.